Elon Musk tried to silence Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with a lawsuit. He expected fear. What he got was a 47-page legal firestorm that turned the richest man on earth into a national scandal. Courtrooms shook, contracts unraveled, and Musk went silent. What did she expose that made the world's most powerful man beg for mercy? Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. The U.S. Capitol was packed, but it was unusually quiet. Inside the Oversight Committee chamber, cameras clicked, pens froze mid-sentence, and even the most seasoned reporters leaned forward. At the center sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her gaze steady, her voice deliberate. In one hand, she held a thick, cream-colored envelope. The congressional seal beside her gleamed beneath the studio lights. "This," she began, holding up the letter for all to see, "was delivered to my office 6 days ago by a legal courier. A cease-and-desist letter from Elon Musk." The murmurs began instantly. Phones buzzed. Staffers whispered. A few gasps echoed through the room. Crockett didn't flinch. "Mr. Musk sent this to stop me from asking questions. But I took an oath to the Constitution, and no billionaire intimidates that." She set the letter down and opened a manila folder stacked with documents. Her fingers moved deliberately, pulling out copies, one after another. "I was going to let this slide, but since he wants to play legal games, let's show America what he's trying to hide." She slid the first document into view. Internal emails from SpaceX, a financial breakdown from Tesla, Pentagon memos tied to Starlink. A tidal wave hit the room. Gasp, flash, chaos. Cable news anchors exploded. Did Elon Musk just get legally obliterated on live TV? Social media detonated. Musk exposed, trended within minutes. On X, formerly Twitter, Musk fired off a string of defensive tweets. Then, nothing. Silence. Not another word. Crockett leaned forward one last time. "When billionaires think they can buy silence, they forget some of us came here to speak for the people." The chamber fell into stunned silence. But to understand how this confrontation shattered the world's richest man, we have to rewind to the moment he tried to make her disappear. Jasmine Crockett didn't grow up with power. She grew up waiting tables in South Dallas, juggling law textbooks between shifts and helping her single mother stretch every dollar. She didn't dream of fancy courtrooms or marble halls. She dreamed of keeping families out of jail, of making the law mean something for people who couldn't afford it. And unlike the politicians, born into dynasties, Jasmine's name wasn't built on legacy. It was built on grit. After graduating from law school with student loans taller than her, she turned down corporate offers. Instead, she walked straight into the storm, defending clients nobody else wanted. Victims of police brutality, tenants poisoned by slumlords, black men arrested for crimes they didn't commit. She didn't just litigate, she exposed. Depositions turned into accountability. Settlements turned into reforms. Courtrooms became battlegrounds where she refused to blink. When she ran for Congress, the establishment called her a long shot. But she had receipts, and an army of clients, families, and activists who knew her as more than a politician. They knew her as the lawyer who never backed down. When she won, she took that same energy to Washington. No performative shouting, no viral stunts, just a relentless, surgical pursuit of facts, justice, and accountability. Inside the House Oversight Committee, Jasmine quickly became the member billionaires whispered about behind closed doors. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her questions cut deep because they were precise. Her command of the law left lobbyists scrambling. She did her homework every time, left lobbyists scrambling. She did her homework every time, and she never asked a question unless she already knew the answer. To most Americans, she was just another new face in Congress. But to the people who feared real oversight, she was the nightmare scenario. A civil rights lawyer in the halls of power, armed with documentation, constitutional clarity, and a moral compass that couldn't be bought. So, when Elon Musk sent his legal threat, he thought he was dealing with a politician. What he didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett had already gone toe-to-toe with giants, and every time, it was the giant who fell. Elon Musk doesn't ask, he dictates. He doesn't wait for permission. He builds the rocket, fires the engine, and figures out the law later. Whether it's launching satellites into orbit or rewriting policies at a whim, Musk plays by his own rulebook, and that rulebook doesn't include accountability. For years, that strategy worked. Governments bent, regulators hesitated, investors followed. Musk didn't just build companies. He built leverage. With a net worth north of $200 billion, 0 cents, he commands not only factories and launch pads, but narrative itself. When journalists criticize him, lawsuits follow. When whistleblowers speak out, they're buried under legal threats. His companies Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Starlink operate with one central philosophy: total control. If oversight creeps too close, Musk swaps it away with a tweet or buries it in paperwork so thick. And then there's his platform, formerly Twitter, now X. Musk bought it not just as a tech venture, but as a megaphone. With over 150 million followers, he doesn't just communicate, he commands armies. One tweet, one cryptic insult, one sarcastic reply, and thousands pile on his targets. Drowning them, hate, misinformation, and online threats. It's not social media, it's a weapon. That weapon has taken down journalists, regulators, even fellow billionaires. Musk doesn't backtrack. He bulldozes. He brags about defying subpoenas. He mocks officials who raise questions, and when cornered, he does what he always does. Lawyer up with Quinn Emanuel, the most aggressive firm money can buy. Their cease-and-desist letters are designed not to start negotiations, but to end resistance. It's a strategy born not of brilliance, but of brute force. Musk doesn't debate. He dominates. His philosophy is simple. I build rockets, you stay out of my way. Politicians, in his view, are just speed bumps, useful for subsidies, but disposable when they ask questions. So when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett asked hers, sharp, targeted, public. But this time, something was different. For once, the target didn't flinch. She read the cease and desist, then calmly turned the page. What Musk didn't realize was that, in trying to silence her, he'd pulled the trigger on his own unraveling. It began like any other Tuesday on Capitol Hill. Crowded hearing rooms, reporters gathering, and the usual buzz of power. In motion, but inside the House Oversight Committee chamber, the temperature was about to drop. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett took her seat, flipping through a manila folder marked with red tabs. Her posture was calm, her tone focused. She was reviewing a recent round of government contracting disclosures, specifically emergency modifications issued to Musk's companies. Contracts totaling hundreds of millions had been fast-tracked without proper scrutiny. The pattern was troubling. The paper trail worse. The hearing had barely begun when her chief of staff slipped her a sealed envelope. Thick, embossed, legal. Crockett opened it slowly. It was from Quinn Emanuel, Musk's legal armada. A cease-and-desist letter, 12 pages of veiled threats, and overt intimidation. It accused her of defamation, demanded she retract her questions, gave her 7 days to apologize or face legal destruction. She didn't flinch. Instead, she held the letter up during her allotted 5 minutes of questioning. For the record, she said, voice steady, this letter arrived just moments ago. It's from Elon Musk's lawyers, demanding that I stop asking questions about his government contracts. The room went quiet. I want to make this crystal clear, she continued. No billionaire, no matter how many rockets they launch or platforms they own, is above congressional oversight. Cameras zoomed in. Staffers froze. Reporters at the back began frantically typing. The chairman tried to move things along, but Crockett wasn't done. Let me remind everyone, she added, my oversight isn't personal. It's constitutional. And if Mr. Musk believes my questions are defamatory, then he should welcome the truth, because that's exactly what we're about to bring forward. The silence cracked with a single voice from across the aisle. Is she allowed to do this? Too late. She laid the letter flat on the table. Her legal counsel, already seated behind her, passed up a binder. Exhibit A, the government contract Musk's lawyers didn't want America to read. The cease and desist had triggered its own chain reaction. Musk had fired the first legal shot. But Crockett had just announced her counterstrike. The committee chamber was no longer a room. It was a furnace. Every member leaned forward. Cameras snapped. Microphones twitched to capture every syllable. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. She reached into her binder and lifted out the first document. A SpaceX emergency contract, signed just months prior. "This was issued without competitive bidding," she said, holding it up. $847 million, awarded with no oversight, no review, and no justification. Murmurs swept through the chamber. "Now," Crockett continued, flipping to the next tab, "this internal email from a Department of Defense liaison suggests that Mr. Musk's personal involvement accelerated the contract. He emailed directly, not through procurement. Personal contact. That's not just unusual, it's improper." Someone coughed, nervously. The chairman raised a brow. Even members across the aisle looked uncomfortable. Next page. A series of text exchanges between a senior Pentagon official and a SpaceX executive. One of these reads, Crockett paused to quote, "Elon wants this signed before midterms. White House is on board." The room gasped. A political timeline? Attached to military funding? Crockett didn't smile. She kept her face calm, surgical, even. "Now let's move on to the matter of retaliation," she said, tapping the cease-and-desist letter again. "According to Musk's lawyers, my questions caused material harm to his companies. What exactly harmed them? The truth? Or the fact that someone finally had the nerve to ask?" A Republican staffer whispered something to their member. A Democrat nearby leaned back, visibly stunned. Then came the moment no one expected. Crockett pulled up a slide on the monitor behind her. It showed an internal Tesla memo, dated 2 weeks before the oversight hearing. The subject line read, "Plan to discredit Crockett." "They were planning this before I even spoke," she said. "This wasn't about defamation. It was about silencing oversight before it happened." For a split second, the chamber was frozen in place. Then, chaos. The chair banged the gavel. Reporters scrambled out of the room to file early stories. Musk's name trended on every platform within minutes. But in that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't watching the headlines. She was staring straight ahead, voice steady as stone. "Let the record show," she said, "that intimidation failed, and the evidence speaks for itself." The aftermath began before Jasmine Crockett even left the chamber. Within the hour, news outlets flooded the airwaves with phrases like, "Bombshell hearing," "Musk under fire," and "Crockett drops receipts." On cable panels, stunned anchors replayed her calm, deliberate takedown on loop. The Tesla and Speka stock tickers dipped in real time as investors digested the documents flashed on screen. But the real tremor wasn't financial, it was legal. That same night, a quiet but unmistakable alarm went off inside the Department of Justice. A mid-level official flagged the footage for internal review. The documents Crockett introduced didn't just raise eyebrows, they suggested possible crimes: contract fraud, procurement violations, obstruction of oversight. At Tesla's Austin headquarters, senior legal staff scrambled to understand how a member of Congress had acquired internal emails marked confidential, do not circulate. At SpaceX, executives were already whispering about plausible deniability and shielding Musk from direct exposure. Meanwhile, Elon Musk himself fired off 3 cryptic tweets within hours of the hearing. One read, "Some people confuse grandstanding with governing." Another, "Defending yourself shouldn't be controversial." But then, oddly, silence. No follow-ups, no memes, no bravado. That silence was noticed. By morning, House Oversight members were calling for follow-up hearings. Whistleblowers, previously hesitant, began reaching out through back channels. And inside Crockett's office, her staff had already received 3 separate requests from government agencies asking for access to the documents she introduced. The cease-and-desist letter, once meant to silence her, was now the very spark that triggered multiple investigations. But it was the response from the public that no one, not even Crockett, had fully anticipated. Constituents flooded her voicemail with support. Veteran government watchdogs called her performance one of the most courageous acts of congressional oversight in decades. Hashtags like still. Crockett didn't gloat. Instead, she issued a single statement to the press. When billionaires try to silence accountability, democracy fights back. It wasn't a soundbite, it was a warning. Elon Musk had unleashed his army of lawyers and influence to scare one woman into silence. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a public servant with proof, purpose, and the national spotlight. And this time the spotlight wasn't moving. The clock hit 5:01 p.m. on a Friday evening when Sandra Chen, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's longtime legal ally, sent her 47-page response to Elon Musk's cease-and-desist letter. But this wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a controlled legal detonation designed to land after close of business, right before the national news cycle exploded into weekend coverage. By 5:09 p.m., the letter had been leaked to the Washington Post. By 5:27 p.m., CNN had confirmed the document's authenticity, and by 6:00 p.m., the story was leading every primetime news hour. Chen's response began respectfully, but it didn't stay there for long. She cited the Constitution's speech or debate clause within the first paragraph, making it unmistakably clear. Musk's legal threat wasn't just baseless. It was an attack on protected congressional oversight. But then came the turn. In the interest of transparency, the letter stated, and since your client has made truthfulness the central issue, Crockett's legal team included nearly 30 pages of exhibits, internal documents, emails, procurement modifications, and whistleblower affidavits. These weren't anonymous claims. These were time-stamped contracts, budget overrides, and redacted reports showing safety issues, excessive lobbying, and questionable relationships between Musk's companies and key federal agencies. It was everything Musk didn't want the public to see, delivered in full, organized, and legally annotated. And that wasn't the worst part. Chen's final section laid out in clinical detail how Musk's cease-and-desist letter may itself constitute witness intimidation, obstruction of a congressional investigation, and potential conspiracy to undermine federal oversight. She cited specific statutes, 18 U.S.C. Code SS 1512, 18 U.S.C. Code SS 1505, even 18 U.S.C. Code SS 241. She attached previous federal cases where CEOs had faced prosecution for similar legal behavior. One sentence chilled the legal world. If your client believes discovery would help his case, we welcome the opportunity. This wasn't a warning shot. It was a legal invitation to war. By Saturday morning, legal scholars from across the country were calling the letter a masterpiece of offensive defense. On MSNBC, Harvard Law's Alan Dershowitz said, "This is what happens when you try to bully a congresswoman who knows the law better than your entire legal team." On Twitter, screenshots of Musk's contract irregularities began circulating with the hashtag #ChuckHoltz stock dipped again. But the real firestorm was still ahead. Crockett had said nothing. Her only response was a short press release. "I stand by my questions. I stand by the facts. And I stand by the American people's right to transparency." Musk, on the other hand, started to fall apart. His first reaction was to post a vague complaint. False attacks from corrupt politicians. More lies incoming. But that tweet got ratioed hard, with users posting screenshots of the very documents Chen had attached to her response. By Sunday, Musk's tone had shifted from rage to regret. The tweet storm stopped, the media blitz ended, and the lawyers, they started calling for backup. The richest man in the world had picked the wrong fight. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished yet. By Monday morning, Capitol Hill was vibrating with a new kind of energy. The halls of Congress, typically consumed with budget squabbles and partisan infighting, were now fixated on a single legal letter and the woman who sent it. Jasmine Crockett had gone from a sharp-tongued freshman representative to a full-blown political force. And the shockwave from her legal counterattack was just beginning to transform the balance of power in Washington and far beyond. Members of the House Oversight Committee, including Republicans who usually gave Musk a free pass, now scrambled to distance themselves. Committee Chair James Comer, known for protecting corporate donors, stunned his staff when he ordered an internal review of all contracts between Musk's companies and federal agencies. Publicly, he claimed it was to preserve integrity, but off-camera he confessed to aides, "We can't let this get bigger without controlling it." Crockett's office became a war room. Her chief of staff, Maria Rodriguez, fielded non-stop media requests. Her communications director, James Washington, coordinated with Sandra Chen to release additional documents strategically. But Crockett herself stayed quiet. No gloating, no press tour, just focused resolve. Her discipline made headlines. "The woman who humbled Musk says nothing," read one Politico banner. Meanwhile, Musk's empire was reeling. Tesla stock dropped another 8% as analysts downgraded their outlook. SpaceX executives were summoned to the Pentagon to explain why multiple contract modifications hadn't been disclosed to oversight staffers. Whistleblowers, emboldened by Crockett's response, began reaching out to other congressional offices. A former Tesla engineer contacted Sen. Elizabeth Warren's staff with internal emails about misused subsidies. 2 ex-SpaceX employees approached the Justice Department directly, with documents showing contract price inflation and altered safety data. By midweek, the Department of Justice announced it had opened a preliminary investigation into potential improper influence and obstruction in the administration of federal contracts. What began as a defamation letter had now triggered a criminal inquiry. And Musk? He was uncharacteristically silent. Behind the scenes, he began calling in favors. He reached out to Republican lawmakers who had previously celebrated him as a visionary job creator. Some took his calls, others didn't. One GOP senator reportedly hung up on Musk mid-sentence. "You picked a fight with Congress," he said. "Now you want protection? Call your lawyer." Crockett's legal team, meanwhile, had already anticipated the political fallout. Sandra Chen had filed additional Freedom of Information Act requests with the Department of Energy and NASA, citing whistleblower leads. She also prepared a memo outlining Musk's potential exposure under the False Claims Act, a law that could make him personally liable for billions in clawbacks if government funds had been secured through fraud. The more Musk tried to spin the story, the more power slipped from his hands. The press now referred to Crockett's response letter simply as the document. Legal analysts called it a historic moment in congressional accountability. Former prosecutors appeared on cable news to explain the criminal codes Chen cited, educating millions of Americans about statutes most had never heard of. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a war for public trust. And in that war, the scales had shifted. The richest man in the world, once untouchable, now found himself at the mercy of a congresswoman from Texas, armed not with money, but with truth, timing, and the Constitution. Friday morning. Washington, D.C. woke up to something surreal. Elon Musk trending not for rockets, AI, or a Mars mission, but for legal collapse. Every major network aired segments on the letter. CNN ran it like a war room briefing. MSNBC brought in constitutional law experts. Even Fox News couldn't avoid it. Musk miscalculated, one host admitted. He tried to crush oversight and handed his critics the hammer. In Crockett's district, her constituents flooded her office with support. Churches prayed for her. College students reposted her video with hashtags like Crockett clapback and no one above the law. Even seasoned lawmakers, some of whom had long tolerated Musk's behavior in exchange for tech donations, began whispering that this could be the end of his unchecked political influence. He had poked the wrong bear, and now the entire forest was awake. But Crockett wasn't done. The House Oversight Committee had scheduled a follow-up hearing to review ongoing federal contracts, but Crockett added a new motion. She wanted Musk's subpoena to testify under oath, not just about the legal letter, but about every contract modification, every safety violation, and every political contact with officials during the awarding of federal funds. The motion passed with bipartisan support. The tide had turned. Musk's legal team tried to respond by offering a private briefing instead. They proposed confidential documentation and off-the-record discussions with committee staff. It was a last-ditch effort to avoid public testimony. Crockett's answer was short and sharp. No backroom deals. If the money is public, the truth must be public too. The committee clerk filed the subpoena paperwork that afternoon. For the first time in his career, Elon Musk was not in control of the narrative. He was being summoned, by force of law, to explain himself to the American people. The man who mocked regulations now faced regulators. The mogul who launched satellites now had to answer questions under fluorescent lights and Jasmine Crockett? She didn't gloat. She sat with her legal team and began drafting her opening statement. A simple line circled at the top of her notepad in thick black ink. You don't get to buy your way out of democracy. In legal circles, Sandra Chen's 47-page response became legend. Law professors assigned it as reading in ethics classes. Bar associations invited her to headline conferences. Her closing paragraph, calmly stating that Musk's actions may constitute obstruction of Congress under federal law, was being called one of the most tactically brilliant, legally threats of the decade. The public, once enamored by Musk's boldness, began to see him differently. Headlines that once praised his ambition now questioned his ethics. Journalists dug deeper. Activists called for deeper scrutiny into billionaire influence on public contracts. Other CEOs noticed. And quietly, legal departments across Silicon Valley rewrote their media response policies. The age of unchecked billionaire power in Washington was crackling, and Jasmine Crockett had lit the first match. As the Capitol lights dimmed that night, one thing was clear. The richest man in the world had tried to make a Congresswoman disappear. Instead, he'd made her a legend. By Monday morning, Jasmine Crockett's name wasn't just trending, it was dominating every political feed in America. From TikTok reels to legal podcasts, the narrative was everywhere. A billionaire tried to silence a Congresswoman, and it blew up in his face. The viral clip of her holding up Musk's cease-and-desist letter, followed by the line, "No billionaire intimidates the Constitution," had racked up over 40 million views in 48 hours. Cable news outlets ran wall-to-wall coverage. MSNBC called it the most most decade. CNN brought on legal experts who marveled at the surgical precision of Sandra Chen's response. Fox News, initially hesitant, shifted its framing to question whether Musk's legal team had gone too far. Even right-leaning pundits were forced to admit that Crockett had played the long game and won. But it wasn't just a media moment, it was a cultural rupture. Late-night comedians lit up the story. On The Daily Show, a clip of Crockett calmly reading Musk's legal threat was followed by a satirical mock letter. "Dear Congresswoman, please stop embarrassing me in public." On SNL, a skit featured a panicked Elon Musk character frantically trying to delete tweets, while a fictional Jasmine Crockett calmly drafted subpoenas over coffee. Hashtag exploded. Elon exposed, Crockett vs. Musk, Constitution over cash. Legal influencers broke down each section of Chen's 47-page letter in viral explanators. High school civics teachers printed out the exchange as a real-time lesson in First Amendment protections and government oversight. Law students began passing the document around as study material for bar prep. Inside Congress, everything changed. Crockett's office was flooded with invitations, speaking events, TV interviews, even requests to advise on congressional reform bills. Progressive PACs highlighted her in national ads. More moderate Democrats, often wary of confronting billionaires, now saw the public appetite for accountability. Even a few Republicans broke ranks, quietly praising her legal discipline and refusing to defend Musk's actions. But the most telling signal came from the financial markets. Tesla's stock dropped 11% over the course of the week. SpaceX's future contracts were quietly put under internal review by government procurement agencies. Investors began asking questions that hadn't been asked before. Who's vetting these deals? What if more comes out? The fallout wasn't just personal for Elon Musk. It was systemic. His brand, once bulletproof, now had a hairline fracture. And Jasmine Crockett's voice? It wasn't just heard. It was echoing through the halls of power. By Friday of that same week, the wheels of institutional accountability had begun grinding. The House Oversight Committee, stunned by the weight of evidence revealed in Sandra Chen's legal response, voted unanimously, bipartisan, for the first time in over a year, to open a full investigation into SpaceX, Tesla, and Starlink's federal contracts. Chairman James Comer, normally critical of Democrats, issued a rare public statement supporting the inquiry. "If even half of what's in that letter is true," he said, "this goes beyond politics. It's about protecting taxpayer money." The Department of Justice followed quickly. Subpoenas were issued to Musk's legal team and to the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. The DOJ confirmed it was exploring possible violations of federal obstruction statutes, specifically 18 U.S. Code SS 1512 and SS 1505, the very charges Chen had referenced. Musk's legal threat was no longer a PR misstep. It was officially under federal criminal review. Meanwhile, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a parallel inquiry into Musk's public statements on X posts that may have misled investors about the stability and legality of his government contracts. If proven, that would mean possible SEC fraud charges and class action lawsuits from shareholders. The message was clear. Regulators weren't backing down. Within Musk's empire, panic set in. Tesla's legal department initiated a full internal review of past subsidy filings. SpaceX executives held a closed-door emergency meeting at Hawthorne headquarters to discuss compliance risk. Whispered conversations turned into outright fear as senior staff began consulting personal counsel. Several executives quietly reached out to congressional staffers, offering testimony in exchange for protection. And then came the international ripple. European regulators announced joint inquiries into Tesla's EV subsidies and Starlink's defense partnerships. Germany suspended a pending expansion deal. The UK's Office of Communications said it would investigate potential unauthorized data transfers via Starlink. Allies abroad began distancing themselves from Musk, not out of politics, but out of self-preservation. Congresswoman Crockett, meanwhile, was unshaken. She appeared in interviews calm, focused, and measured. "This was never about Elon Musk," she said on CNN. "It's about a system that allowed unchecked influence to go unchallenged, and that system is finally waking up." The system was, indeed, responding not just to her, but to the message her stand had sent, that no fortune, no following, and no fleet of lawyers is above the American people's right to know the truth. In the end, this story was never just about Elon Musk, or even about one cease-and-desist letter sent to a freshman congresswoman. It was about the line between private power and public accountability, and what happens when someone with a spine, a statute book, and a stack of receipts refuses to move. Jasmine Crockett did not blink. She read the threat, invoked the Constitution, and answered intimidation with documentation. She didn't grandstand. She prepared. She didn't trade insults. She filed exhibits. And when the richest man on earth tried to silence oversight, she reminded him that congressional questions are not defamation, they are democracy in motion. The fallout proved it. Contracts were reopened. Regulators stirred. Investors asked questions they should have asked years ago. Law schools taught Sandra Chen's letter as a model of strategic offense. And the myth of the untouchable billionaire crashed. If you watch this far, you know the real point. Democracy only survives when people in power are forced to answer to people without it. That requires evidence, courage, and persistence, not access, branding, or bots. It requires citizens who pay attention, share the truth, and demand better. So let's make this count. Like this video if you believe no one is above the law. Comment, "Power answers to the people," if you agree that Congress should never be bullied into silence. Share it with someone who still thinks money beats the Constitution, and subscribe, because we will keep tracking every contract, every threat, and every abuse of power you're not supposed to see. The next billionaire will try the same playbook. The next cease and desist will arrive on the same thick paper, and the next target will face the same pressure to fold. Here's the difference now. They know what happens when someone refuses. Remember Jasmine Crockett's example the next time a powerful name tries to turn the law into a weapon against oversight. Remember Sandra Chen's letter the next time a threat arrives dressed up as authority. And remember your role in this: to vote, to verify, to volunteer, to raise your voice when silence is the goal. Institutions don't change because they feel embarrassed on television. They change because millions of people insist on it, loudly, relentlessly, lawfully. This channel exists to arm you with facts, strategy, and courage. Stay with us. The fight isn't over. It's only getting smarter. Because in America, truth doesn't beg for permission. It demands accountability, and it wins when we stand together and vote.